In this episode of the Toolbox, we'll start off with the latest developer news. I'll talk about the rise of the meta frameworks and why you need to learn them. Plus, I'll do a review and demo of Astro, one of the new meta frameworks that just did a rewrite a few weeks ago. You're not imagining things, the pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Hello everyone, this is Rey Villalobos, and I stream about front-end and full-stack tools Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. So follow me and subscribe on all the social media things for more content. If you want to watch any of my past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, raybo.org. So hello there. I am trying out something different today. I'm going to start off with some news. I keep on sort of seeing articles that I think everyone should know about, so especially if you're a web developer, of course. There's a lot of stuff happening in the industry. So first of all, let me pull up the website here. All right, so first of all, of course, is the replacement of Jack Dorsey by a new CEO of Twitter, Parag Agrawal. And so that's a pretty interesting development that just happened this week, a few days ago. You probably heard about it. I'm really curious about what you think about the new CEO. If you take a look at it, there's actually a lot of different places that have all these profiles about this new CEO. So you should definitely go check it out and read them. Essentially, he was the CTO of Twitter for a long time. And so he's now the new CEO. Jack Dorsey just decided to quit. He says that it's his own decision. Hopefully that's true. I think that Jack Dorsey was so closely associated with Twitter for the longest time that I think a lot of times it became more about him and less about Twitter itself. So it's really good to get some new blood every now and then. And I think that this new CEO has an opportunity of really pushing the platform forward, especially since he is such a technologist. So, it'll be interesting to see how he changes things. He was the chief technology officer since 2017, and he's apparently, very good friends with Jack Dorsey. So he has been, it says, a confidant of Mr. Dorsey, many of the company's biggest strategic initiatives. And one of those big initiatives has been the move towards a decentralized network. I'm not sure what that means for Twitter, but we've seen that with Web3 and other things happening in the industry. We've seen that people are going to like a decentralized model, which means that not any one company owns the personal information. The personal information should belong more to you, and you should have more control over it, except that when a company like Twitter is leading the charge in this kind of infrastructure, you wonder how that really, sort of translates into a decentralized. How decentralized can something be? A lot of Web3 things use like the blockchain and that sort of aspect of the web that allows you to sort of not be tracked and stuff that Bitcoin is based upon. And so the problem is when companies own these different sort of blockchains, then is that really decentralized? And how much are they going to be willing to let go? I mean, if you watch some episodes of Silicon Valley, which is a fantastic show on HBO, you know that they actually talked a lot about the new internet. And so it looks like people are finally trying to do that. I'm encouraged by the fact that this is a very technical guy. I think that has obviously positives and negatives. Sometimes when people are too technical, they tend to sort of miss kind of maybe a social aspect of how to run things. And after all, Twitter is a social platform. It'd be interesting to see after Steve Jobs left Apple, you really wondered how the company would change. And I think that if you saw some of the things that happened afterwards, you could argue that they're not as creative as they were before. But I do like sort of some of the sort of polished changes that they did. Whenever a new product comes out, it's not just Tim Cook coming out. It's sort of like the whole company, and it's very diverse. So it feels really good, but you do tend to wonder, how somebody new is going to change the company and change the culture. I do think that they have a really good opportunity to reinvent themselves. I think Twitter needs a little bit of a rebranding. There's a lot of, I don't know, stress that happens when I go on Twitter. I still have an account. I have like, several thousand, followers on Twitter. So I feel like I spend a lot of time gaining that audience. I don't want to get rid of it, but I really don't feel great when I go there because there's a lot of, when I joined, which I joined like what I call pre-Oprah, I felt that, the Twitter before Oprah, I think, was a lot more technology people. And after she joined, I think it really changed to be more of in the zeitgeist of the culture and more of a cultural thing. And so, it'll be interesting. I'm really interested to see what sort of changes he's going to be making. There was an announcement, I think, yesterday about him uh, making a new rule that I believe images had to have a consent from the people in the images, which some people interpreted as slightly controversial. How would that apply to memes that people post? What about journalists? Journalist doesn't mean news sites anymore like it used to. There's a lot of smaller journalists, and so there are some protections in this country. Twitter itself is a global company, so who knows how all that is going to be worked out. But I think that there's a unique opportunity here to sort of maybe rebrand in the same way that Facebook is trying to rebrand with Meta and the Meta universe. I think Twitter has a unique opportunity here to do something new. It'll be interesting. I remember hearing that before Steve Jobs died, he told Tim Cook that don't think of this Apple as my company anymore. It's your company now. I'm passing it on to you. So hopefully, Mr. Agrawal is sort of listening to that. It's no longer Jack Dorsey's. It's your company. What are you going to do with it, and how do you think it should change? So it'll be interesting. And I think for us developers, I mean, I feel like the Twitter platform itself hasn't really dramatically changed. You've seen a lot of new frameworks, not frameworks, a lot of new social media platforms like TikTok, of course, and Instagram and other platforms that have really taken a huge chunk out of what Twitter used to be. You still have like a word limit, so I think that there's an opportunity to grab more mind share, especially with a younger audience. We'll see. I think it's really interesting for us developers. I mean, I think that, and it could be interesting. The decentralized network of the sort of structure of the network, I think, will be interesting to see how they approach that and how all that, like Web3, blockchain, and all those things drive the web and the near future to far future. A lot of stuff to consider. Also, I saw this article about Google. So these previous employees sued Google for breaching the "Don't Be Evil" part of their contract. So this is pretty interesting. Google used to very publicly have this attitude of not trying to be evil, and eventually they sort of, I don't know, they didn't really take it out. It does say that that even though "Don't Be Evil" was famously their motto, they moved away from the motto after renaming itself Alphabet. So once Google did their basic rebranding, and they sort of became a parent company of YouTube, more of a parent company, and then there were these things underneath Google. It's they really went away from that motto, and you could sort of feel it a little bit that they were no longer not necessarily trying to be evil. It's sort of tough to define, I guess, what evil means, because it might be different things to different people. But it says that don't be evil is part of the company's official employee code of conduct. So that's interesting. I didn't know that that was the case still. And then they're alleging that a breach of contract comes out of these three employees that they accuse them of leaking confidential information to the press, and also systematic searches. So they were searching for some things. So it looks like they were protesting some things within the company, so they got fired. I do find it interesting that the defense of this group happens to be a "Don't be evil" defense. Honestly, I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't tell you, but I think that that's an interesting defense. I don't personally. I don't think that it'll fly. It's so generic. What does that even mean? It doesn't. It's not like a legal term that they could be sort of taken to task for. So what does that even do to them? So, all right, another thing, of course, that we've been talking about is Facebook and Meta itself. And today we kind of have a Meta theme today. So interestingly enough, Facebook gets a first order to unwind a completed deal. So I guess they had acquired, and I didn't even know, they had begun to acquire Jiffy, which sort of makes sense. So Jiffy is those animated GIFs that you see in all over the place. So it's sort of a company that aggregates those, and so they, I guess, were started to buy them, and the UK ordered Facebook to sell Giphy or Jiffy. Is it Jiffy or Giphy? Let me know in the comments. I always think that it's GIF, right? I always go with GIF. But anyways, yeah. So uh, they said they asked them to sell Jiffy, the animated file store engine it bought for $315 million in 2020, in part because the deal would attract even more users to Meta's portfolio of products. Sort of an interesting reason. Anything that they do would attract more users. So why specifically Jiffy? I mean, out of all the things that you think of Facebook having too much of, Jiffy doesn't seem like their worst sort of picadillo or problem with what they own. I think that perhaps this is just the first of more things to come, more regulation of the company. It'll be interesting as they try to rebrand themselves, and try to launch the metaverse. I guess governments are taking a look at them a little bit more than they used to. So, and then finally, speaking of the metaverse, this is interesting. I saw a news article today that Roblox wants to sort of get into I think everybody wants to get into the metaverse. And although Facebook is the most sort of public company that is trying to get the mind share around the metaverse is more than just Facebook and Meta. Smartly enough, they try to co-opt that term so that you kind of associate the metaverse with them. But there's a lot of other players that are trying to get into that market. And there's people like Second Life who's been around for a long time, way before them. So this is interesting. Lots of new grants to STEM organizations. So it's, I guess Roblox is trying to get into the K-12 education. I've seen a lot of people use things like Minecraft in order to teach in high schools concepts about programming. So Roblox has now a new $10 million fund to support the creation of online learning experience that take advantage of its platform in a unique way. So that's interesting. I think you're going to see a lot more news and plays on the metaverse as companies are trying to, especially 3D companies like this. So Roblox, if you know anything about Roblox, it's like a virtual environment where players connect, and they have all kinds of things within that platform. So I think you're going to see more and more companies get into the metaverse. And as a developer, I think you should start thinking about what your place is in this new sort of environment. I'm not a very I've never been like a 3D person, but that means that schools are going to be, having more sort of courses on the metaverse and what that means. And, things like 3D that used to be super slow are almost immediate now. Some of these environments are just created on the fly. So I think that you're going to see a lot of movement in here. And this is probably the time, in the same way that when I discovered the web, I thought, wow, this is great. For me, I really love the two things of the web, the fact that it's sort of a design platform as well as a development platform. And so I think that you should sort of think about, is this a place that I want to be? Is this sort of, direction that is really interesting to me? And then start making your plans to see how that may go. So before I go on to the next section, I see a lot of people around. Hello, Javier. Good to see you again. So Javier's been one of my regulars before. So good to see him coming in again. And also Malo Florent. Hello. I wonder where you guys are calling from. And then Mahdi Sultana, hello, everyone. Hello. Yeah, so leave me some comments. What do you think about the metaverse? Are you interested in that? Do you think you're gonna do something in the metaverse? Are you just gonna stick with the web? I mean, I think there's a whole new sort of I know planets and universes of opportunities in the metaverse, and I know that for me, switching over to the web was like a huge deal. So perhaps that's something that, if you're interested in 3D and that kind of technology, something that you can sort of approach. So I don't see any more comments. Let me just check this website to see what else. All right, so next up, I want to talk about the rise of the meta frameworks. So every week I have this section called the shorts. And in the shorts, I try to show you new and emerging frameworks and tools and other tips that you can use. And last week I showed you a framework called Windy CSS. So it was a demo of this framework that is a competitor to Tailwind. It's trying to do a just-in-time compiler like Tailwind, but a little bit better. It has some new features that I think are pretty interesting. Well, I found out that the developer of Windy CSS apparently has a lot of time. So he actually created another framework, and I think it's sort of related to Windy, or it has some of the same sort of guts of Windy. So what it is trying to do is essentially be a framework that doesn't have any pre-built sort of utilities. It just has ways of creating shortcuts. Now, this particular framework is very much like an alpha stage right now, so it's definitely not something that even I would look at right now, but it's very interesting. It says instant on-demand atomic CSS engine. So maybe you can take a look at this article right here, and that other website that I showed you was the online playground. So let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Yeah, you can play around with it. It feels like it says it's really fast, so super small, 3.5 kilobytes, and then 0 dependencies, which is great. That's one of the things that I do like about Windy CSS, the fact that it doesn't depend on post CSS or anything else. The less dependencies, the less update problems you're going to have with your projects. So that's really cool. So the big selling point here is that it has no core functionalities or no core utilities. Everything is provided via a preset, which, if you remember what I showed you last week, the way that you create shortcuts in Windy CSS is by creating these utilities that will translate into will translate into these different classes that then it converts. So everything is provided via presets. So there's no parsing, no scanning. Instances is 200 times faster than Windy CSS or Tailwind JIT. So interesting. Like I said, maybe this is something that I'll cover eventually. So CSS and JS runtime version. That sounds interesting too. I didn't read that before. So it looks like they may have a runtime engine. So one of the things that I mentioned last week about Windy was that Tailwind CSS has this new CDN that you can use to try things out. So it looks like they've added that into this Uno CSS. So very interesting. Maybe something that I'll do a demo later on and take a look at. I would say don't worry about it too much. I think that the most important thing is to try out, to understand the ideas, not necessarily not necessarily make a switch to a new framework, but understand what the ideas driving these new frameworks are and make sure that you can articulate them and know when they're going to be useful in your life. So if you think that something, you're looking for performance. I know that when I worked at Tribune Interactive, occasionally I had to really focus on performance. then something like this can really help you with that. Instead of using something like Bootstrap, perhaps something that is, super incredibly fast, and it doesn't require people downloading libraries that it writes all this custom stuff for you. That could be something you look at. So the ideas are more interesting than the frameworks themselves. The frameworks are constantly in flux. So, okay, maybe something to look at in the future. And so this made me think about the rise of what I'm calling the meta frameworks. Oh, we have some comments here. So let's see. Metaverse. I'm not sure. Let me answer some of these. So I'm not sure you would be interested in that. I guess it's good if you love virtual and gaming. And I'm not a big fan of that. I've been thinking about that. And the one killer app feature that would make me get into something like the metaverse is, look at right now for creating the screencast, I have two big screens over here. I have a teleprompter, I have lights everywhere, and I have like a couple of cameras, microphones. If you were doing this in the metaverse, you wouldn't need any of those things. You could have an infinite amount of screens. Imagine you put on some glasses and all of a sudden you have essentially like an infinite desktop. You can have all the screens that you want without having to pay for them. And then think about how that would change the way that you can communicate with others. So I'm thinking like, for example, if you watch like Star Wars, like the Phantom Menace, like some of the second generation Star Wars, and you remember the way that the Jedis met was essentially through a virtual platform. So I think that the things that are interesting to me are not the gaming things. I'm not really a huge gamer, although I love like a coder game or occasionally Minecraft. But I'm not really somebody that spends all day gaming. But if you go beyond the gaming aspect, then you think about how this can open things up. Like an infinite work environment, work from anywhere. You can wear, shorts and a tank top, but your avatar can be you with a business suit, and then you can have meetings with as many people where you get a little bit of that interaction. I think that that's really the sort of things that would appeal to more people, and I think that those are the things beyond something like Second Life are the things that I think we're going to see become killer ways of being able to interact and change the way that we do things. Just an infinite monitor available from anywhere where I could take a meeting, at the beach or something. And it wouldn't be any different. I'd have access to all my stuff everywhere, regardless of where I was at. Now you're talking about something that really could be useful to me and perhaps something in your life. So think about it that way. And maybe it'll be something that you'd be interested in. So I wanted to talk about the rise of what I'm calling the meta frameworks. So meta frameworks are, frameworks of frameworks. So if you know that right now the main frameworks are like React, Angular, React, Vue, and then maybe you can sneak in Svelte. I talked last week about the main developer of Svelte was hired by Vercel, who also creates a lot of other stuff. So Vercel creates the Next.js framework. And the fact that they hired this person, though, means that they're really going to, that guy had been working part-time and he created Svelte. He just released a 3D sort of version of Svelte that lets you hook into, I think it's 3JS. Interesting. Just imagine if that's what he's doing in his part-time, imagine what he could do if he were able to focus full-time and not have to worry about money. So they hired him to develop things full-time. So it'll be, I think that Svelte has the kind of possibility of becoming a major player. It does have some interesting ideas. The other platforms to sort of stabilize, there hasn't really been a lot of changes to those platforms. They have become more of a low-level way for people to do things. What's happening now is that you have these frameworks on top of existing frameworks. So if you look at something like Next.js or perhaps Nuxt, which is the Vue version of Next, and others, you will notice, like if you look at Remix, that a lot of times they're decoupled from any particular framework. And that began with something called the Jamstack. So the first thing that I wanted to show you was my favorite Jamstack site or Jamstack platform which is 11T. And 11T came out a few years ago as a static site generator. So what it will do is it'll actually take your website, and instead of dynamically loading like headers and footers and the data, it just essentially takes files and converts them into HTML. And then you have your entire website as a flat file that doesn't take as much time to load because it doesn't have to process anything. And so this is really great. And 11T, I think, did a fantastic job. And again, it's what I use for Rabo.org. So if you're wondering what I use here, that's what I'm using on my site. Very simple. I write my articles and then I publish them. And when I publish them, they get converted from Markdown into HTML. And there's like, there's like a little application here that lets you search for items. And there is some other interactivity that will, like, I'm using Bootstrap to like rotate these things. But everything is flat. So every page is pre-rendered, and that makes websites load really super fast. So this is kind of before this. This is not really. This is kind of a framework. I mean, it feels more like a utility or a build tool than anything, than a framework. But what happened then after the Jamstack really became a popular thing is that people started getting interested on using Jamstack because of the performance, but they were still missing some server-side rendering. So after 11T, we started seeing a lot of server-side ways of getting data from the server while you were still creating flat files. And then we moved on to what I'm calling embedded meta frameworks, which are frameworks that are based on specific platforms. So this is one called Gritsum. It's specifically based on Vue.js. I mentioned Nuxt, which is Vue.js based, and Next, which is React based. Next is owned by Vercel, the same company that hired this other gentleman. And so this is kind of the next level after 11T came out, and they saw the advantages of a flat file system, pre-rendered HTML, pre-cached files. Then you saw the next version of this was, this kind of like embedded into a specific platform. Then you see frameworks like what I'm going to call Astro, which we'll be covering today, and Slinkity. So Slinkity is something that is based on 11T. And what it does is the thing about, something like React or Vue is that it really doesn't give you a way to create a blog or a way to create an e-commerce website. It just gives you an engine for doing things, right? So these frameworks are sitting there on top of React and allowing you to create things like routing, things like components that can be fired up and connect with the server. And so these frameworks are sitting on top of the frameworks. That's why I call them meta frameworks. They're frameworks on top of existing frameworks. Now, Slinkity exists on top of 11T, and it tries to do what we'll see that Astro does really well by giving you some features on top of 11T. So, really interesting project. That's maybe something that I'll cover maybe in a week or two. And then we saw sort of the latest framework that just came out earlier this week. I think it came out on Monday. Yeah, I think it came out on Monday. It was a framework called Remix. So Remix was based on a React Router, like a project that was a router. And then they made it into its own framework, and they started selling it internally. Not internally. They started selling it as a product. Well, now it's become its own framework. Now, this is really odd because what it does is it puts the entire flat file generator system on the server. So in the same way that right now, when you run 11T, you're essentially getting Markdown files and converting them into HTML files. Now, the problem with it is that you have to run all that on your local machine, and it's sort of a pain because you have to maintain all of your modules, and every time you publish an article, you have to rerun things. So things like WordPress are cool because WordPress gives you like an interface that you can just go in and do stuff. And Remix essentially changes the way that people build the web by putting the sort of flat file engine on the server, back on the server. So we're going from serverless, from server products that use like PHP and MySQL to serverless, which, was partially pioneered by 11T and others. Really, it's been around for a long time. And now we're back into Remix, which actually puts everything back on the server. The advantage is that by putting everything in the server, you don't have to worry about all that processing, and it can be really smart about how it caches things. So that's what Remix has done. So let me see if there's any more comments and stuff. Let's see. Yeah, this will be great if VR could take over the concept of Zoom meetings. Just imagine, I'm telling you, I am picturing the Jedi Council, essentially. Like you're in a room, and all of a sudden, all these other people sit in there, and you can have conversations with people in 3D. I think that, and then just the virtual environment. I think it's pretty cool. So let's see. I have this right. This is also another like killer app. You have Zoom meetings with family. So what about having meetings where you actually get to see like your grandkids or the funny uncle that you have, and they can right now I think one of the things with Zoom meetings is that they're two-dimensional, and you don't get there's something missing about the way that you interact with people when you're experiencing them in 3D. So I think that there's a lot of potential with something like the metaverse. So Malo just says 11T. All right. Yeah, my favorite too. Love 11T. So what about, okay, so Peter says, what about base code? The base code, i.e. React, Vue, and JavaScript. I mean the base code in which, okay, so let me add this. So base code, which 11T converts to flat HTML. So yeah, I think that you're going to see today. So essentially, with 11T, you write in Markdown, and then you can use a templating engine, which can be JavaScript. And then it outputs. So with the JavaScript engine, you can then do a query to an API, can pull in some data, and then it can generate all of the pages for you. And with something, you'll see that, when I demo Astro, it's sort of a level beyond that. You can actually create all your templates in JavaScript and also React or Vue or Svelte or whatever else. I think the newer meta frameworks are decoupling from specific engines. So that is one way in which they're different. They're like, I'm not married to a specific engine like Nux and Next and some of the other ones that we saw. Gritsum, for example, we're just going to let you do the pieces that you need to get your work done, and you can use whatever you want. Or you can use a combination of, Vue and React or whatever you want, or Svelte even. So, yeah. Yeah, a little, it seems like it's a little bit on the expensive, eccentric side. Yeah, but I think companies are probably going to warm up to the concept of, think about like, I don't know, some of the meetings that your company might have now are just get-togethers, and it's like a big Zoom call. Yesterday I was in a meeting, and we have this, like, after the meeting, we have this breakout, right? And they call it breakouts into, sub rooms. And I remember that we had a couple of higher level executives come to the meeting, and they, were running a little late, and the people were saying, well, do you guys want to ask the executives more questions, or do you want to go to the breakouts? And almost unanimously, everybody just wanted to go hang out in the breakout rooms. I think you learn a lot from having a small conversation with people. And I think that, if you're looking at it beyond the gaming, the metaverse is going to maybe be more about making those things more meaningful. So that'll be, yeah. Let's see, I could imagine GitHub. And also, Peter, welcome back. I know you've been gone for a couple of weeks, so good seeing you again. So yeah, I could imagine GitHub might do some, yeah. I think everybody's going to be working on that sort of thing. I think that's the next Wild West, is going to be the metaverse and how it's going to be assembled. And there's probably going to be a lot of opportunities. So let's see. Javier says that's what IBM said when they were trying to tell them. Yeah, IBM, such a funny story about how they dropped the ball on that thing. So yeah, actually, I'm no good at spotting future trends. I'm okay, I think, especially on, I don't know, web things. I think I'm pretty good. Again, like, the important thing with all these things is not that you learn the latest. You don't need to know Remix quite yet, but you need to know why it's doing what it's doing. a lot of companies are really hyper focused, and I think a little bit too much on performance. And so this is sort of the ultimate performance juggernaut. Imagine now people have been flat filing like all their stuff. What if the server took care of that? Well, there's a lot of benefits. It's the same way when VS Code, went on GitHub.dev. I really rethought about how I develop and noticed that, hey, if it's on the server, then I don't have to worry so much about, maintaining, like the latest modules. The modules don't even run until you run a build process. So you tend to focus more on the work and less on running and maintaining the engine. Perhaps you can have people that do that and maintain the engine, make sure that everything's up to date, run security, applications to make sure that everything's secure. So I think that the trends are important when they affect the work that you do or the work that you'd be doing. So I think just understanding what the big deal is about these different frameworks, and that's why I try to give you like a little demo, and I try to give you sort of the ones that I think are important. And I am just as picky and also just as angry about learning something new. It's just that it happens to be my job. I know that with Astro, I went through this whole process where I was super like, I was excited about it, and then I was like, this thing stinks. I don't know if I would use it. And after I did the demo, I started to rethink. Well, think about the positive aspects of working with that framework. And I'm on the fence. Like I was like excited, and then completely opposed to it, and now I'm sort of warming up to it again. So who knows? Let's see. So awesome. So let's, I guess, get into the Astro. Yeah, so I have been around pretty consistently, except that I have been missing some stuff. I'm gonna definitely disappear a little bit more around Christmas, but I do plan to do another one next week, perhaps on Slinkity. I don't know. Maybe I should do next. I don't know. There's so many things. I'm trying to catch up with all the frameworks, I think, and I'm never gonna be get caught up. So, uh, yeah, I know what you mean. So that's my job. I will dig into them. I'll give you the highlights, hopefully. But I think that it's important for you to understand the concepts, because the concepts, if you look at what's happening with frameworks, uh, what takes place is that a framework will come out with some sort of new feature, and then all the other frameworks will actually adopt that same feature. That happened with like React and Vue, and you see that with frameworks as well. So one of the big deals with Astro and some of these other new frameworks is a concept called hydration. So hydration means that no JavaScript loads until you need it. So for example, if you load up a page, it will just load all the visual parts of the page and it won't load the JavaScript. Now, we used to do that before, but now you can say, I don't want you to load the JavaScript unless the item that you're loading is visible, and it kind of automates that process. So when you scroll up to like maybe a scrollable, bunch of images, kind of a scrollable, carousel or something like that, it won't load the script for that carousel until it needs it. Makes it faster. Again, I think like some of those things are obsessed about, performance, which I don't necessarily think it's the most important thing always. Definitely important for the people that run the servers. And that's why you see them making the investments in these platforms and these companies, because to Google, if you shaved a second off of everybody's processing time when they, connect to Google, that saves them like a crud load of money, right? So anything that they can do to make the web more performant is really interesting for developers. It's like, just sometimes you just want to get your job done, right? You just kind of want to get your work done. So yeah, lots of trends. So yeah, so I agree with that. So all these frameworks are just trying to solve the problem or speed automation, and it's a big rush. So I would say just understand like the concepts, and hopefully I'll get you to those. And yeah, there's so many. I've completely sold out to Vite. So, that's interesting. So the Vite is, I went through this whole process and I ended up in Vite, and I'm really happy that I was right. It is becoming the most sort of robust engine. I think all these latest frameworks that I've been showing you are actually now all running on Vite because it's just better than the other ones, and it's a little bit easier to set up. So yeah, lady loading styles. Okay, so let's get into Astro. So Astro this is the website astro.build. And so every website or every new platform needs some sort of hook to get you interested in. I think for Astro at the beginning, it was this concept of hydration, like partial hydration, getting you, not loading things that you didn't need until you needed them. That was revolutionary. You're seeing it get adopted everywhere now, though. So that's a good concept. And I think that if you understand how these frameworks make that simpler and the fact that that exists, that's the kind of thing that you're going to be responsible for adopting wherever you're at. Hey, is our page, when I was at Tribune, I did have to worry about, performance in a much more bigger way because, our server costs depended on the processing power. So if that goes down, that's actually real money to any company. So that partial hydration can have this great effect on the performance of your app. Now, I found that after trying Astro, I went through that whole process where first I thought it was the greatest thing. And then I found like all the ugly bits about it. And I'm sort of on the fence. I'll explain to you when I go into the demo why I'm on the fence. So at its core, Astro is just a static site builder, similar to 11t. So it's like that, or like Gatsby or Next.js, probably more like Next.js than 11t. There's a great page on their site. So if you go to their docs, there's actually a really good page that talks about the Astro versus X. And first I'm like, oh, what the heck is even Docusaurus? Never heard of that. But it's really thorough. Look at all the comparisons that they have right here. So you can compare it versus Jekyll, versus Hugo, which is something that I used for a while, versus Next.js, and all the other popular ones, things that I don't even know about. Like I don't know what Zola is. SvelteKit is the Svelte sort of version of it. I think we're going to see sort of frameworks that are not necessarily tied to a specific platform perhaps be the winners. I don't know. It just depends on how good the other stuff is. If you look at Vercel, who bought Svelte, they have Next, and that is currently, I think, the leader. Like if I was trying to learn one to be more marketable because I'm looking for a job, I'd probably learn like React and Next. Or, I do love Astro, but it's so small. It's still a very, very much a baby platform. So it's currently on version 0.21. And just, I think last week or the week before, they rewrote the thing. Before, I think they used Snowpack and they migrated to Vite. I don't know what it means about aliasing, but they did these components in Markdown. They added like a bunch of stuff. They switched to Vite and some other things. So it's in heavy development. Again, perhaps not something that, unless you just wanted to play around with it, that I would try. But what it's trying to do is really important. So the other thing that it does is that it gives you a way of generating content that is very opinionated. So one of the issues with using it is that you have to get used to the structure that you have to do things in. And that's really, for me, that's the difference between a library and a framework. For me, a library is almost like a set of utilities that do certain things. A framework is a structure that when you adhere to that structure, you get all these benefits. So the benefits to maybe a little bit of the weaknesses is whereas something like 11t is extremely flexible, right now, at least Astro is very opinionated. So you definitely have to have a folder called source. You have to have a public folder. So public is where you put all the files, like your images that you want to be accessible outside the build process. You can put in like anything you want in there, like your favicon and whatever else. And then in here, you have three different sort of main sections: the components, the layouts, and the pages. Pages is where you put your pages. So essentially your website goes in here and it builds the pages out of either layouts or components. Layouts would be like a template that you would use. And then components would be small utility things that you want to add. The interesting thing about the components is that you can use components in any framework. So you can write a component with JavaScript, or you can write it with Vue, or with React, or with Svelte, or with whatever the heck else the next great thing is. So that's what's interesting is about it. The sort of caveat is that it is very opinionated. So you have to learn its structure. If you don't like the structure, then you're bummed. I think it's a pretty clean structure. One of the things that I very much dislike about some frameworks is when they put everything like in the root level of your repo. I am always like putting things inside a subfolder. So source works. I mean, I call it different things. So usually you like source, and then I don't usually have a public folder, but I will have like a kind of post-process folder. So something like a docs folder or like a build folder or something like that. It's just that with right now, at least with Astro, you have a structure and this is the structure. Whereas with 11T, it's like they have a structure, and unfortunately the structures dump everything in the root, but you can customize it to do whatever you want. Maybe that's something that they could work on. It's not a big deal. Just let me know what the structure is. Now in the pages, you can create either MD or Markdown files, or you can create .astro files. .astro files are a little bit more flexible, so we'll talk about those. So you have the components, which is where you put all of your code. The component can be as simple as just some HTML like this, right? So this is kind of a static HTML component. So think of it as like an include. The other thing that's pretty interesting is that when you create a component, like a small piece of code like this, then you can create a set of styles in that component. So you can have sort of like your HTML and then a style, a local style. Now, the interesting thing is that these components will be they will be related to that component. So you don't, like, if you have a headline level 1, you could just create a style for a headline level 1, and that headline style will be connected to this component, so it won't pollute any other headline level 1 style that you've created anywhere else. So that is actually really smart and pretty cool. So they're that's called scoping. So they're scoped to that component. That is really cool, because then you could just write, that's one of, things overwriting other things is a big problem with CSS. You end up writing like some CSS and you have to write the thing that undoes the, base styles, and then you end up writing the code that's why frameworks like Tailwind are more popular, because they get rid of some of that. But scoping the styles, pretty smart. You also have this concept of front matter. So if you haven't used front matter, you use these 3 dashes. This is pretty popular in things like, any sort of flat file framework. You create these 3 dashes, and this is normally in Markdown is like a horizontal rule. It would output as a horizontal rule. So this is sort of like I guess they're calling it a code fence. And then in here, you can put in a couple of different things. You can put in some front matter. So you can put some YAML type code that has like variables and also values for the variables. The more interesting thing is that you can create code. You can actually write code that gets pre-processed before the component renders. So you can create any bit of JavaScript, any bit of Vue. You can fetch data, right? So you can go to an API, fetch data, or you can load up some data from a local file, and then it renders based on whatever happened over here. So that is the great thing, I think, about this framework, that now you have, on a per component basis, you have the ability to run certain scripts that can do all types of things: connect the database, get data, and render the components based on what happened there. And the components, again, they can be React or Vue components, so they can be pretty powerful and do a lot of things. So that is pretty interesting. So you can import one component into another file. And then if you know like Vue or React, you'll know that this is how you import a React or a Vue component, right? And in the same way that you create these subcomponents, you can create props to pass information to the components. So the interesting thing about it is that if you know like React or Vue, this pattern is very familiar to you. So it feels, whereas something like 11t, with 11t, you can do similar things, but you end up writing your templates in a templating language. So something like Liquid or other languages that are essentially subsets of JavaScript or a combination of JavaScript. And think about it, like in React, you end up doing like JSX. It's kind of like HTML and JavaScript combined. Well, this is kind of doing the same thing. It's letting you create, JSX style code to let you combine JavaScript with your data. So you can create a variable up here, and then you can output that variable. Interestingly enough, you use single curly braces. Most templating languages that I've used anyways lately are double curly braces. So that was like a little bit of an adjustment for me. Oh, let me get rid of this comment. So let's see. How do I remove it particularly? Yeah, let me remove from this so we can see more stuff so it's not over. Yeah, so you can also create dynamic attributes. And again, you can query data, so you can create loops. The thing is that it feels like you're working with JavaScript, whereas when you use something like 11t, it feels like you have to learn a separate language. You have to learn Liquid, or you have to learn, any of the other, and 11t is like super flexible. It lets you use like almost any templating language. With Astro, you're just using JavaScript. So in a way, it feels natural, but in a way, it's unnatural because it's a little bit unnatural sometimes to use JavaScript in your HTML and also in your Markdown, which gets a little bit weird, or use Markdown in your HTML, which you can do. And again, the way you pass information is by using these props. So that's pretty cool. You have the ability to create pages. So this is where the routing part comes in. So anytime you create a document that's either a Markdown file or an Astro file, then it'll create a page for you. So here it shows you that if you create an index.astro page in the pages folder, it's just going to be the sort of top level URL here. If you create another page called about, then it just creates a sort of almost like a directory with an index page in it, right? And you can also use dynamic sort of routing, and that's where this can get pretty powerful. And look at how beautifully you can actually load data into Astro. You can use an await. So that's like a top level await feature that lets you just grab data from somewhere and then build some items based on that data directly in the component. So again, this is starting to look a little more like React JSX if you think about it, but it has this section that pre-renders all that stuff instead of sort of dynamically getting the data, loading the data. It actually gets the data, and upon build, it'll pre-rendered all that data so that the data and the output is not really dynamic. It's more static. Or you can hydrate the output so that it does the loading, perhaps, because it's still JavaScript. So you can load things dynamically and also cause things to load only on demand, hydrate them in that fashion. So layouts, pretty self-explanatory. Layouts is how you sort of create templates. You refer to the layouts in a couple of different ways depending on what you're using. And then you create, essentially, this is just an HTML template. And the only interesting thing here is that it has this little slot item. So slot is how you tell Astro that this is where your information is going to go, right? So when you call this layout, the page that calls the layout is going to insert stuff into that slot, right? And then routing, I think I just explained routing. It has a lot of static routes, but it also lets you do dynamic routing based on content. So you can create pages based on data, which is pretty cool. And then there's a partial hydration feature. Every component can be asked to be hydrated in a number of different ways. So let's see, they load individually. Yeah, so you can add a segment called client visible, which means that the component won't load anything until it becomes visible in the browser, which is fantastic. And there's ways of doing this. So in JavaScript, there's a feature called what's it called? Something observer. I can't remember it now. It blew my mind here. Information observer. I can't remember it right now, but essentially it's an observer that takes a look at whether or not perhaps something is on the page and lets you do things then. This sort of automates that feature into the framework so that you can very easily tell that you want to load a component, but only if it's visible, or you want to perform some sort of JavaScript only if it's visible. So you can say, hydrate the component on page load. So any component, you just add this sort of attribute to it, and it performs in this manner. Automatically load the component, load it when everything else is done. So like if you're loading a page, instead of it sitting there and loading something that it doesn't need, you can ask for it to, hey, whenever you have some free time, go ahead and load it. So if somebody's reading the page, they haven't gotten to an interactive piece, they can now just say, by the time somebody interacts, they'll probably, this will probably have loaded then. Also, you can say only when it's visible. And also, look at this. You can actually do it on a media query basis. What? That is really awesome. And I have no idea what this one does because I didn't read that far into it. All right, so looks pretty good, right? I think that the important, yeah, thank you, Michael. My mind sometimes. Intersection observer, yes, something that you should know how to do. The nice thing about this framework is that it does that for you by just letting you add a property to the component, and the properties are pretty simple. You don't have to write your own intersection observer. It's just something that it takes care of for you. That's pretty powerful, and look at all the different ways of doing them. All right, so let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to do the ridiculous live demo that nobody should ever try. And I'm always very nervous. So I'm going to put this on my desk. I have like a shortcut that when I type DSK, it just does like a CD /desktop. So once I do this, then I can install Astro. I really love the way that most modern frameworks work now, because to install Astro, to install a lot of newer frameworks, you just do an npm init. So first I'm going to need to make a directory. I don't like this part because I think that's one of the things that V does well. It just makes the folder for you, but all right, it's not perfect. So make directory, and then you give it a name. I'll call it Astro. Then I'll go ahead and cd to that. You can see that I was playing around with another one called test, right? And then you do an npm init Astro. Now in here, it's going to ask you which template do you want to use. You can create your own templates if you want to. And if you look at the documentation, they show you what the different sort of templates do. I'm gonna go because I don't like people to add things when I'm learning to my document. So I'm gonna just go with the minimal. All right, so this will create the project files. You still have to do an npm install. So let's go ahead and take care of that. And then so this will sort of create a GitHub repo out of it. I'll go ahead, and if you go to rabo.org later on, I'll have links to the beginning, probably like right now. I just got the joke. Okay, I don't know what I said, but anyways, so let's see, where was I even? So I'll create a GitHub repo for you, so don't worry about it. It'll be on my repo website, which is github.com/planet of the web. And then you can just run npm run dev. So before we do that, let's go ahead and open this up in VS Code. So, oops, not side code. Come on, Ray, type. Yeah, code, and then open this up because I'm done with Hyper. I really need it right now. And let's take a look at what you got installed. Let me check on time. Oh my gosh, we're like already out of time. So I'm going to keep on going. Sorry, it's running a little bit long, but I'll keep on going and see if I can be like a little faster. All right, so you get all the stuff. Notice that it does create the public folder. Anything in there will be automatically published to the build. Then you have the source folder. This is where the pages folder is. And right now there's only a single page. Let's go ahead and run this thing. So npm run dev, and so I've been getting this error lately. So npm install and the way that I fixed it, I don't know if this is going to be an error that you'll see later on, is by just installing esbuild, then it works fine. I don't know what it is. I don't know if they're going to fix that. Then I'll do npm run def, and then it'll start a browser or a build sort of thing for me. And there it is. There's the fantastic Astro. All right. So this happens to be, let me make this smaller here. Come on. And let me go ahead and hide this. So this is essentially what you're seeing is the index.astro file that is right here. It has some boilerplate for the page, and then it just has a welcome to really nothing going on in here. However, it does tell you that if you create any styles here, they'll be scoped to the entire page, I guess, or to this particular component if you happen to be inside a component. So if you put any markdown files, they'll actually work. So let's go ahead. Let me go ahead and add. I have a couple of files. So let's go ahead. So I have these two. Here's the Astro folder that I just created, right? And then I have a folder full of markdown documents here. And they went to my other window. So they essentially, these are pretty basic pieces of markdown. I did want to have that top stuff in there, but it'll be because I don't have a lot of time. All right, so in the Astro folder, then I'm going to add this, actually in the pages folder, I'm going to add this cast subfolder. So I'll put that in here, right? So now, there it is. So under cast, you see all of these pages now. And now those have become routes that I can access. So if I go to / and I think Gil is the easiest one. Oh, it should say cast, right? Because I named it cast. Come on. So now I'm getting all nervous. Cast / Gil. So I shouldn't have done Gil, because let me go ahead and grab this top one, Ane Rin. Gil has a few more extra things in it because I was trying to save time. Ane Rin. Okay. So if you pull up this page, you'll notice that it's just the rendered markdown file. So it just, by adding a bunch of markdown documents in there, it just goes ahead and renders them, which is great. Now, if you want to, you can add front matter, and that's why my other pages, that's why Gil wasn't working. So if I pull up Gil, you'll see that he has I cheated a little bit, and I created some extra stuff in there. So what you can do, so this is Markdown with some front matter. The front matter is formatted in YAML, but with Astro, you can actually include a section that you want it to pre-render with JavaScript. So notice that I have an import statement right here. So it's importing a layout that doesn't yet exist, and that's why I was crashing before. I don't have this layout created yet. So the way that you create a template is by creating a layout. So let's go ahead and make a new folder here. I'll call it layouts. Again, it wants these things to be named a certain way. And in here, I'm going to make another file called main.astro. All right, so for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Bootstrap and just go over to the document, sort of the install section. Oops, not Bootstrap. Icons. Let's see. So I'm going to go to docs, getting started here, and just grab this starter sample, right? And I'm going to come in here and just paste that. And I'll get rid of some of these comments here. Right. And all I need to do here is add a slot, not a slog, a slot sort of piece right here. Right. And this is where my content will go. So if my template is being called by one of these pages, so let's go ahead and pull up the cast and pull up this first one. And I'll add some front matter here that tells this item to pull up the template. So let me, let's see. Give me a second here. I'm seeing myself here. Just give me a second. I got so many screens that look exactly the same because they're like previews of all my windows that I'm having a hard time finding the one that I need right now. So let's say I need to go to VS Code and open this up here. All right, so in the All right, so the way that you import, or really that you execute JavaScript within the Markdown components is by using first the front matter or the fence code post. I don't think these are fence code posts. So you do a setup section here, and then if you use a pipe, then you can add a number of different commands. So you can say import layout from, and then we have to find in the layouts folder this main.astro file, right? And then import layout. So I think I may, because I'm in a subfolder, I need to go 2 levels. And so now you can see that it changed a little bit. So now we have imported the template that we created, which imports Bootstrap, the basics of Bootstrap in here. Let's go ahead and add just a container. And we'll put our slot in that container. So now you get a little bit better margins, and this thing is a little bit responsive. So really actually quite easy to create these templates, right? And you can, in addition to all of that stuff, you can also add more front matter into each of your pages. So if you look at some of these other pages, I've cheated and I've added like an image, a slug, and a title. So slug is just like the way that I named my files. Some of these people have like spaces, and some people have like curly braces, curly quotes on them. So I'm just going to copy, in the interest of speed, I'm going to copy this and put the slug in here and use this one. And I also showed you that you can use the front matter code in here. So I'll add this piece of code right here. So here I'm asking for information from the front matter. So I can go grab the title here of the page as well as the image, which for some reason the image isn't working. So that's weird. Let's see, did I just copy it? Let's go back. Front matter image. Let's try going to Gil now, see if Gil's loading up. I probably made some sort of mistake. And no, it looks like Gil's not. Well, you know why? Because I haven't. Okay, so I didn't copy the images, right? The images are right here. So I'm going to put that in. Remember, for it to appear on the website, it has to be in the public folder. So I'm going to move my images into the public folder. And there it is. And you know that I'm typing all this stuff in because I'm making all kinds of mistakes. So there's the image, right? So pretty cool. This actually feels a lot like what I would do in 11t. You can create using YAML. This language is called YAML. You don't need the quotes for this unless, so let's see, and there you go. You don't need the quotes unless you have weird characters. So if you had like curly, some weird characters in there, then you definitely want to add the quotes. It's safer to have them. So, but notice that none of these have them. So that's the cool thing about YAML. The interesting thing is that in Markdown, I can actually execute or pre-execute some setup JavaScript. And so this is just a regular JavaScript import. The other thing that I can do is modify this right here. So actually, I'm going to copy the import layout statement and the other types. So in addition to Markdown files, you can create .astro files, and those are a little bit different than the regular ones. So what you do here is the same thing with the in this section, you just use the import statement without the setup statement. The setup is just for Markdown files. Import is just for regular files. I don't know if it's, I need to go to the main level because this will be just the main sort of, I did expect this error because I do need to, I'm not down a folder. So if I do import layout, and then I'm going to take off all of this other stuff because I shouldn't need my template that I created in here anymore. And this should be loading, except that when you are using a .astro file, it's more like a JavaScript component. So with a .astro file, then you want to have a layout tag. Components are always in capital letters, right? So layout, and now it's adopted the layout from this file. So cool. Now, what else can I do with this? So if I want to, I can actually fetch some content, and this is pretty sweet. I'm just gonna, well, I can type it in. So I'm gonna create a variable called mycast, and I'm going to use the async await. So this Astro has like top level await in it, built in. So I'm gonna tell Astro to fetch content and then get me everything that is in the cast folder that has a markdown extension. All right, I know that I made an error there, so I forgot like an equal sign. Yep, you can always tell the demos that are real when you see people making like the normal mistakes that they would make. So cool. So now I have in this variable called mycast, I have some data that I can add into the page. So let's go ahead and implement some of that. Let's see, we'll get rid of, yeah, this is not an about page. So now I can say, I'm gonna create a unordered list with a class. Oops, I need to begin this with just some bootstrap classes. Right, and then in here, I can now use an expression. So this is where it's more like JavaScript. So the expressions in Astro begin just with the single curly braces. And I can use that variable, mycast, that I created, and then I can use a map command to map all the data or the items from the data. And then I can do like, I think I can do something like item.title. Let's see if that works. Okay, so item.title should be in an expression as well. And now I have just grabbed all of the content from the markdown files. And then I have created a list of items from the data in the markdown front matter. I don't know about you, but that is pretty impressive, right? It's pretty awesome. Let's see, comments and reactions. Thank you, Javier. Yes, I am brave or foolish, either or. I did practice, but it doesn't matter how many times you practice. You just have to know this stuff. So let's see. So we're using Markdown markup as standard in here. Yeah, you can use Markdown, or you can use these Astro files. Again, I think that's the difference between this and something like 11t. 11t lets you use like any templating language, including JavaScript. It does have Markdown. I would say that something like 11t is more flexible. Something like Astro is more opinionated. But the thing that brought me back was that the fact that you're writing everything in JavaScript means that you don't have to learn a different templating language. You could just use JavaScript, and you already know how to use JavaScript. So perhaps this is a little bit better. I think that some things get a little bit weird. I know that when I was writing some of the Markdown, I don't know if it's just because I don't know, it didn't know how to write the JavaScript, the Markdown version of an image. So in Markdown, you usually do something like this for images. And I don't know if I was doing things improperly, but I couldn't do something like this. Right? I couldn't just use the front matter to create the image. So I don't know what maybe I was doing it wrong, but it felt like I wasn't maybe used to using JavaScript to do these things. So yeah, but yeah, you can use Markdown or you can use this new thing. So let's see. Does the terminal tell what yeah? So if you load React, then you'll have React in there as well. So it would show you your mistakes. And if you prepare, actually, it would be telling me the mistakes I made here if I would have pulled up my console. So let's see, very appealing. Yeah, right? Like if you already know JavaScript, it does take a little bit of getting used to begin. But all right, so let me show you how you do a component. So as I mentioned, instead of just doing a list like this of things, you can also create this as a componentized piece. And that component can be a React, or it can be a Vue, or just a JavaScript component. I always like to show the simplest version of things. So I'm just going to do a JavaScript component. So let me do that. Let's see. So I'm going to need, so I have layouts, pages, and I'm going to need another folder called components. Better spell it correctly. Nents. All right, here we go. And have some notes over here on the side that you guys can't see. So, okay, so this component is going to be called cast list item dot astro. Cast list item. There's nothing worse than misspelling something. All right, so what we can do here is, again, the front matter with the 3 dashes. And then we can say, we can create a constant and then pull something from props. So if you are familiar with Reactor View, you know that you can pass things along to a component through props. I'm going to create a receive a prop called cast member here from Astro props, right? And then over here, then I could just write some regular just HTML. Now, this is going to be a component, so it's going to be like an expression. So it's going to have these expression signs in it. And then I'll do an li class col list on style. On styled. Look, it's trying to help me there. Styled. So I have like a code, whatever the code helper in GitHub is. All right, so list on style, and then we'll do an href. Oh, and when you do hrefs, you just use another expression here. So we'll use sort of expression syntax. We're going to go to cast, and then we'll do cast member slug, right? And then in here, we'll do an image source. Again, get rid of the quotations, and then cast member img. So we're just pulling things from the front matter. Get rid of this thing. Cast member title. Okay, and I don't know if you have to do this slash like you do in JSX, but I'll do it anyways, just in case. So now we have a component that receives some props, and then it outputs like the image, as well as, yeah, just creates a link to the cast member. Hopefully I didn't type anything incorrectly. And now instead of calling this list item right here, I can call my component instead. So that should be a little bit better. So let's do, my new component is called cast list item cast member equal each of the items and the data that I receive when I do my my fetch. All right, so this looks like, and I should do, I guess, a slash just like you would with a component. Okay, it feels like I have some typos here. So no, maybe that's right. Okay, so the reason why this is coming up red is because now I need to import my component, right? So I need to say, let's see, import cast list item from components cast list item Astro there. So boom. What? Yeah, I think the most impressive thing is when it works. And as you can see, I componentize like the output right here, and I could go on, and I think, yeah, it looks like the links are screwed up. Like I didn't do the links properly in my subcomponent. So I think I spoke too soon about getting it just right. I'm sure. Let's see. So ignore cast list item. So here, yeah, you know what I didn't do is this should be in curly write curly braces here because it's an expression. Let's check it out. Okay, so now it goes to each one of the pages. All right. So I think I'm not showing you hydration, but it's so easy to hydrate a component just by going in and putting in the different attributes right here to hydrate them. I just don't think that it would sort of help if I hydrate this. Maybe I could do it whenever the page loads, or add a bunch of content in there and add a bunch of content, and we could maybe turn on the hydration. But I think this gives you a good taste of what it's like to develop in Astro, and yeah. All right, so forgive me for that. So hopefully that gave you a taste of what it's like to develop with Astro. Yeah, thank you, Peter. It is pretty awesome. I think that I'm warming up to it. I think it's taken me a few days to figure it out and to try to come up with something that showed you how it works. I really like it. I think I might do Slinkity because I already use 11T. So I think if I did Slinkity, then it would tell me, if I have my Rabo.org right now, would I want to switch it to Astro and be programming in JavaScript with the ability to add components? Or do I just want to take what I have and then use Slinkity, which is going to give me some of these same features, except that I can take what I'm already using. So I do not know. There's a generic LinkedIn user saying it's cool. Interesting. Hello, LinkedIn user. So this was a marathon. Yeah, sorry. Oh man, 20 minutes late or over the time. Hopefully you found that interesting and useful. And I'll try to do something again next week. I don't know when my cutoff for the holidays is going to be, but I'll try to do something next week. Send me a note if you have requests, if you want to see Slinkity, or you want me to do something even crazier. I don't know, Next.js, Remix. I'm not sold on Remix. It is the next thing, but I don't know. I do like the concept of things being on the server, but I'm just not sure about it quite yet. So send me a note, help me decide. And hopefully I will thank you, Peter. Good to see Peter. Good to see Javier, which are two of the regulars, and anybody else that found usefulness out of this, let me know. And thank you for coming. I'll see you hopefully next week.